There were no war plans discussed. There was no classified material sent on that thread. The White House counsel is looking into the matter, looking into how this other number was inadvertently added. Obviously, that was a mistake and a serious one. But I just want to say, I mean, thanks to President Trump and his strong leadership and all the everybody on that group chat, the leaders on that group chat are extraordinary people. I know them all personally. They're patriots. They're doing a great job for the country. And that was a successful mission. I mean, we're taking out Houthi terrorists. That's what the American people expect the administration to do, to restore peace through strength and to act decisively. So, look, they've acknowledged that there was an error and they're correcting it. And I would have asked the same thing of the Biden administration. I don't think anyone should have lost their job over that because an errant number, found its way onto a dialogue between leaders.
Speaker Johnson, it was the number of a journalist, Jeffrey Goldberg from The Atlantic. Why was he in anybody's phone? I keep saying that for me, this is so much of the argument. And admittedly, if this had happened under Biden, you would hear people on the political right screaming for blood, and they wouldn't be wrong. We would ask ourselves what actually took place. Were war plans discussed? Not like that. But was a group text amongst the leaders of the United States available to a journalist? Yes. Yes, they were. And it was indeed wrong, and it's an issue. Tony Katz Today. Good to be with you. Noah Rothman joins me right now from National Review. His latest, striking the Houthis does not constitute bailing out Europe again. He is also the author of Unjust and the Rise of the New Puritans, the Progressives' War on Fun, which is available at Amazon.com. And good to see you. We were talking just before we got on air that most people on the political left are discussing whether or not these people are incompetent and they're terrible and they put America at danger. That did not happen. That's a very easy thing to state. Although you don't like the idea that they allowed a journalist or anybody else who should not have been on a group conversation into the conversation. My argument has been, why in the world Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic? I don't like Jeffrey Goldberg. I don't know the man personally, but I don't like him going back to hiring and firing Kevin Williamson from National Review because a couple of staff members got their nose out of joint that he might say something that they find offensive. It's as if they had never read any Kevin Williamson in their entire lives. You went from a completely different angle, and you said, is anybody going to look at what J.D. Vance just said right here? Is anybody going to take a look at this? So before we get to your piece, let's start with the overall. This conversation on the app Signal, you've got Marco Rubio and John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, Tulsi Gabbard from Director of National Intelligence, who you and I both had an issue with in being confirmed. All of these people having this conversation. Is it so weird that they had a conversation?
Well, I'm going to say at the outset that I do not share your confidence that our intelligence has not been compromised here. I don't think we have the information to know that, and the indices that we do, the indications that we do have, are extraordinarily troubling. Signal as an app, whether it's secure or not, is not allowed on federal devices, meaning that if it is downloaded on a personal private device and you're conducting these sensitive deliberations on it, they very well could be compromised by foreign actors. Why do we know this? We know this from the Hillary Clinton scandal in 2009 when she was using a BlackBerry on a tour in Southeast Asia. We understood at the time from security experts who are not partisans that foreign actors can compromise these devices remotely and gain access to American intelligence. Even if we're not talking about sensitive information, like the notion that we're talking about, as Jeffrey Goldberg said, weapons platforms, the identities of active CIA personnel, target sequencing, target selection, the notion that this stuff isn't classified doesn't pass the smell test. This government overclassifies everything. To suggest that it wouldn't classify targeting information like that is just simply uncredible. And Steve Witkoff was in Moscow at the time in which he was included on this text thread. Was he using an unsecured device? Was that compromised? We don't know the answer to that one way or the other. We cannot say for sure. This is certainly a violation of records keeping laws. It is certainly a violation of security protocol where you're supposed to be in a SCIF, a secured compartmentalized information facility, and Signal is not an authorized app. All of those are lapses. The notion here that this was perfectly secure and not compromised by America's adversaries, I think the jury is certainly out on that. The second issue is what was discussed, which is also of vital importance to our enemies.
Now,
even the
first,
deliberations internally.
I'm going to interrupt you really quick.
Sure.
I hear what you're saying, and I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong, and I don't mind any investigation into that. But the argument from the left is war plans, every last little bit of detail, every single thing, and that does not seem to be the partial, if not totality, of all these conversations. I will concede that we can argue that it shouldn't have happened on this app. John Ratcliffe did testify in front of that Senate committee today that it was placed onto his work computer. So there's now going to be this question. I concede those points as acceptable, but you got into what was being discussed. Go ahead.
Right, which is also, I mean, that's something that is of vital importance to the national debate, but it's equally imperative to learn that from the perspective of a foreign intelligence asset. What you would like to know is what the administration's principals are thinking. Who thinks what? Who's arguing with what? Whose positions are where? And how do we compromise those positions? How do we ingratiate ourselves into those positions? That sort of internal deliberation is of vital importance to America's allies and adversaries alike. And what was discussed are a lot of things that I think would be equally of equal importance to America's allies and adversaries. For example, you had Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth divulging the notion that Israel might act on its own to act against the Houthis before us, and that would complicate our position, which demonstrates the degree to which the United States and Israel are interacting with each other, have interoperability, and have control over each other's actions. Again, vital importance to America's adversaries and allies abroad. Likewise, but what I think you're talking about, as we discussed earlier, J.D. Vance's confusion over why it was in vital American U.S. national interests to preserve and protect free maritime navigation of the seas. And he seems pretty confused by this. He said that the Suez Canal is pretty much a European interest. It's not an American interest. Europe gets 40% of its trade. He said 40% of its trade through the canal. We get 3%. So what's in it for us? Even if we take things down to a really tangible, physical notion of, just what's in America's interests in terms of what you can hold and what money you can extract from our partners abroad, which I think is a really picayune way to talk about international affairs. But let's say that. Sure, Europe gets most of its trade through the Suez Canal. You know who trades with Europe the most? We do. Europe is our number one trading partner. They buy the most imports that we export from the United States. If Europe has less money to spend on American goods, we have less money. It's a sort of elementary conclusion that you would expect the vice president to fully apprehend. But even if you don't think of that way, the notion here that, and the administration's actions contribute to this impression that it is attempting to engineer a transatlantic schism. It wants to establish daylight between the United States and its European allies with the grand objective of extricating the United States from its alliances abroad and the obligations associated with them. And now the colorable argument there is, well, conservatives have been saying for years that Europe has to take more stewardship over its own security, and therefore it needs a better security force. Why did we want that? That's a tactic. What's the strategic objective there? The strategic objective is to have Europe be a more active proponent of and steward of our shared geopolitical interests. If we stand up a European defense force while at the same time sacrificing our influence over the trajectory of European politics, it's not good for America. Why? Because if you think Europe is constitutionally inclined toward confrontation with China, with Iran, or even Russia for that matter, you're nuts. Europe is inclined towards accommodationism, towards appeasement. That's the European inclination, specifically the Western European inclination. And if we were to stand up some sort of a European force, first of all, there's no such thing as a united Europe in the absence of the United States, a prima inter pares, guiding all these 33 member states toward one shared objective. But even if you think that there would be some sort of a unified European foreign policy, and there wouldn't be, it would be one that would not necessarily support our interests, steward our interests. It would be one that would frustrate our interests vis-a-vis China, Iran, and Russia.
Let me jump in, talking to Noah Rothman of National Review, nationalreview.com, and let me engage a defense of Vance here. In that, what if the argument is not just about what are the stakes for the United States, or as you write, right? We don't have the trade here, but rather a conversation about if we're going to get involved with bombing the living, out of the Houthi rebels, which I personally am not opposed to. This is me saying it.
Yeah.
we're going to have to explain ourselves to an American public that we told we're the people who are not going to be intervening. We're the people of no more forever wars. We shouldn't be involved in certain conflicts, and maybe other people should be taking a lead because it will be better for them. I don't know if that is JD Vance not understanding the field, but rather JD Vance ascribing to a very different political philosophy than you or maybe myself.
Yeah, I think you're being far too charitable. I think JD Vance understands perfectly well. I do. I think JD Vance understands perfectly well that an Iranian-funded and armed proxy shooting at U.S.-flagged maritime, commercial, and Navy vessels should be blown out of the water. I think he gets that. I think he doesn't want that as a political argument, because his political argument is the U.S. should retrench from its obligations abroad, regardless of what happens. And I'll tell you what will happen. Aspiring hegemons in their regions, Iran and China alike, will fill the vacuum that is left by a retreating United States. The spheres of influence, inviolable spheres of influence that fell apart in the end of the Cold War, will return. And there will be truncated access to these regions, truncated trade, a poorer world, a more protectionist world, a more paranoid world, and a much less peaceful world. And I think JD Vance believes that that is a political argument that is in service to him. And I think he knows fully well what the alternative arguments are, and he mischaracterizes them and creates straw men at every opportunity in order to demonize and anathematize his opponents, not to persuade, not to cajole, but to shut critics up with the expectation that partisanship will paper over the manifest deficiencies in an otherwise unpersuasive argument.
Noah Rothman, stay right there. Noah Rothman from National Review. We'll get to you, back to you in just a moment on the live stream. More is coming up. I'm Tony Katz. This is Tony Katz Today.